Pause for a moment because this situation is not ordinary noise generated by wealthy or influential people. When someone with enormous public reach, vast institutional influence, and substantial exposure to federal contracts steps into a high stakes allegation involving a sitting or former president and Jeffrey Epstein, the environment changes even if no legal outcome immediately follows. The impact is not limited to whether the claim is ultimately true or false. It reshapes what becomes publicly visible, what is searchable, what institutions can plausibly ignore, and what questions begin circulating inside offices that normally prefer silence. Precision matters here. This analysis does not assert that any specific document, photograph, flight log, or record circulating online is authentic, accurate, or even real. It does not claim that Donald Trump committed a crime. The purpose is different. The purpose is to explain how prosecutors and investigative institutions would evaluate a high-profile public allegation that ties a powerful political figure to Epstein's network. What would matter legally, what would not, and why enforcement becomes complicated the moment political power intersects with investigative authority. Even if the internet frenzy is stripped away, one underlying reality remains. Epstein was not merely an individual. He operated as part of a network. Networks generate records. Records generate leads. And when prominent figures push alleged connections back into the mainstream, legal systems must decide whether those claims are treated as background noise or as the opening of a file. This analysis follows how prosecutors actually think, not how social media reacts. The scenario under discussion involves public statements by Elon Musk, suggesting or implying that there were meaningful connections between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein during periods that were not fully explored in prior prosecutions. The implication being advanced is that there may have been unexamined overlaps involving time, location, travel, social contact, or business interactions that warranted deeper scrutiny. Again, this analysis does not affirm the authenticity of any materials. But when a claim of this nature is made publicly by a highly influential figure, the legal question becomes how such claims would be evaluated, validated, or dismissed within the justice system. There is a critical distinction between vague insinuation and specific testable factual allegations. Prosecutors treat these very differently. The more specific the claim, the more consequential it becomes for everyone involved. The accuser, the accused, and the institutions that must decide whether to investigate. Prosecutors do not begin with conclusions, they begin with classification. The first question is whether the material presented constitutes admissible evidence, investigative leads, or mere argument. A photograph can qualify as evidence only if it can be authenticated. Who took it, when and where it was taken, whether it has been altered, and what it actually depicts. A flight record can be evidence only if it can be traced to reliable sources such as FAA records, operator manifests, maintenance logs, billing records, or sworn testimony from crew members. A timeline overlap may be relevant, but only if it can be shown to be more than coincidence and tied to legally significant conduct. This is the first filter, authenticity. The second filter is relevance. Relevance is not moral outrage. Relevance is whether the information helps establish an element of a crime. This is where public discussion often oversimplifies matters. Social association alone is not criminal. Knowing Epstein socially is not criminal. Appearing in photographs together is not criminal. Many powerful individuals moved in overlapping circles during the relevant decades, and courts recognize that reality. What matters legally is knowledge and conduct. Did someone know about trafficking? Did they participate in it? Did they knowingly benefit from it? Did they aid, abet, conspire, obstruct, intimidate, or conceal? Those are the legal lanes. Without evidence that intersects with those lanes, there may be a scandal narrative, but not a prosecutable case. However, a lack of immediate prosecutability does not preclude investigation. Prosecutors initiate investigations when claims are credible, specific, and verifiable, especially when allegations involve serious crimes and vulnerable victims. The central question becomes credibility. In federal practice, credibility is established through corroboration. Claims gain traction when they can be tied to independent sources that do not rely solely on the accuser's reputation. These include airline and airport records, financial transactions, phone metadata where obtainable, contemporaneous calendars, emails and messages obtained through subpoena, and third-party witnesses who can independently confirm presence and context. These forms of evidence are valuable because they are resistant to political dismissal. They are harder to frame as partisan attacks. If specific and credible materials emerge, institutions will eventually attempt to test them. Not necessarily publicly or immediately, but testing is the core function of legal systems when allegations are concrete and stakes are high. This raises the recurring question of why such investigations were not pursued earlier. Legally, the answer is complicated. Epstein's prosecutions occurred under different circumstances and eras. The 2008 Florida Non-Prosecution Agreement remains infamous for its leniency and has been widely criticized by legal scholars and victims' advocates. The 2019 Southern District of New York prosecution was broader and more aggressive, but Epstein's death eliminated the central defendant, reduced leverage over potential cooperators, and complicated efforts to pursue a comprehensive case. Ghislaine Maxwell's later conviction demonstrated that prosecution beyond Epstein himself was possible, but it did not result in a complete public accounting of all potential participants. Prosecutors typically charge what they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, not everything they suspect. Victim safety, evidentiary limitations, and trial strategy shape outcomes. Public suspicion persists because institutions have historically demonstrated a tendency toward self-protection. Sometimes that protection is explicit, sometimes implicit, sometimes the product of inertia or fear of destabilizing powerful systems. Prosecutors would not necessarily label this a conspiracy. They would call it institutional risk aversion. Institutional risk aversion is real. The analysis becomes more sensitive when allegations involve a person who controls executive authority. The Department of Justice operates within the executive branch. Presidents appoint leadership, influence priorities, and shape institutional culture. Norms exist to insulate prosecutorial decisions from politics, but norms depend on enforcement. When allegations implicate a sitting president, investigative pathways become complicated. Not impossible, but constrained. Pursuing such matters requires independence, institutional backing, and a willingness to absorb career-ending pressure. This is why public statements by highly visible figures can matter, even if those figures are imperfect messengers. Public allegations raise the cost of ignoring claims. Silence becomes louder. Oversight bodies take notice. Journalists press for answers. Judges read the news. Pressure diffuses across institutions, sometimes forcing action where direct pathways are blocked. State attorneys general, congressional committees, civil litigants, and foreign authorities may pursue parallel avenues. These are not substitutes for federal prosecution, but they create friction. And friction is often how accountability emerges when direct enforcement is constrained. Flight records illustrate how prosecutors approach evidence. FAA records identify aircraft and ownership, but not necessarily passengers. Operator manifests, crew logs, billing records, airport security footage, customs documentation, and staff testimony must be layered together. A screenshot alone proves nothing. A verified chain of records transforms travel into an established fact. Even then, travel alone does not establish criminal conduct. It establishes proximity, access, and opportunity. Photographs function similarly. By themselves, they usually prove only that two people were present together at a specific time. They become more significant when paired with testimony and pattern evidence. Witness testimony is central to trafficking cases. Prosecutors differentiate among direct victims, corroborating victims, staff witnesses, pilots, drivers, assistants, third-party observers, and cooperating associates. Each category has strengths and vulnerabilities. Cases are built by layering these perspectives until the narrative becomes difficult to refute. Statutes of limitation further complicate matters. Some offenses may be time-barred, while others, particularly those involving minors, obstruction, or ongoing conspiracies, may remain actionable based on later conduct. The analysis is charge-specific and timeline-dependent. If prosecutorial independence is compromised, chilling effects follow. Without institutional support, few prosecutors are willing to initiate investigations that leadership may shut down. This raises the broader constitutional issue at the heart of the matter. The rule of law is not defined by statutes alone, but by enforcement. When enforcement becomes optional for the powerful, equality before the law erodes. At the same time, reckless allegations without evidence are dangerous. They contaminate legitimate inquiry and provide easy defenses. The standard must remain high. Naming someone in connection with Epstein requires verifiable, authentic evidence, not insinuation. Those seeking to understand whether institutions are treating claims seriously should watch for signals: independent authentication by reputable outlets, formal legal responses addressing specifics, oversight inquiries, state-level actions, revived civil discovery, and sworn testimony rather than media statements. Public records persist. Civil processes continue. Jurisdictional boundaries limit executive control. Even if nothing occurs immediately, placing alleged materials into the public domain creates reference points that can matter later. The responsible conclusion is this: if specific, testable claims supported by authentic documentation emerge, prosecutors would treat them as leads to be verified, corroborated, and either dismissed or developed. Whether that occurs depends less on the law itself than on whether independent authority is willing to apply it. The defining test is not whether laws exist, but whether they can reach power. Watch who demands verification. Watch who attacks messengers instead of addressing facts. Watch who remains silent. And watch whether anyone is willing to place evidence into sworn records. That is where allegations stop being rumors and begin becoming case files.